Meeting of the we call this meeting of the Denton County Transportation Authority to order. We do have a quorum. It is 10:02 a.m. First out of the chute, we have an invocation provided to us by our own county judge, Andy Eads, as well as our secretary of the Denton County Transportation Authority.
Thank you. So please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, and thank you for the opportunity and the privilege to live in America, a free country. Please be with all our armed service personnel here stationed domestically and around the world as they work to advance peace and freedom around the world. Please be with us today and allow us to make good and wise decisions for your people here in Denton County and the region. In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen. Please join me in the pledges to our flags. American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And to Texas, honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible. All right. Let's go ahead and move this over to staff. Staff, do we have any introductions?
No, sir, none today.
Next up on the agenda is public comment. This agenda item provides an opportunity for citizens to address the DCTA Board of Directors on any agenda item or other matters relating to DCTA. Each speaker will be given a total of 3 minutes to address any items. Anyone wishing to speak shall be courteous and cordial. Speakers making personal, impertinent, profane, or slanderous remarks may be removed from the meeting. Unauthorized remarks from the audience, stamping of feet, whistles, yells, clapping, and similar demonstrations will not be permitted. And citizens that are not able to participate in person can email DCTA no later than 3 o'clock on the day before the meeting to ensure the comment will be distributed to board members prior to the meeting. Board of Directors is not permitted to take action on any subject raised by a speaker during public comments. However, the DCTA Board of Directors may have the item placed on a future agenda for action, refer the item to DCTA administration for further study or action, briefly state existing DCTA policy, or provide a brief statement of factual information in response to the inquiry. Keisha, do we have any public comments?
Yes.
All right, next up, consent agenda. Board, any questions on the consent agenda? If there are no questions or comments or no items to be pulled, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move approval.
I'll second.
I have a motion, a second. Board of Directors, if you would please signify acceptance by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Regular agenda, item 1, discuss update on emerging opportunities, Frisco Go Zone, Texas Women's University bus route, and span of Denton County partnership. This is a discussion item, so it's for the board to get some information and start thinking about these processes. We have Paul Christina, our presenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and welcome to our meeting today. It's good to be with you. And this first item is really a discussion item looking for direction from the DCTA board as staff navigates some emerging opportunities that are very much aligned with things that we have been talking about, especially since January in our strategic workshop. The first is the Frisco Go Zone opportunity. Earlier this year, we were approached by the North Central Texas Council of Governments and staff at the city of Frisco with the concept of understanding what would it look like to launch a Go Zone service in the city of Frisco. This is set up primarily by the upcoming World Cup in 2026 and the need to establish some transit service in the city of Frisco. And where we are right now, and so DCTA staff, COG staff, City of Frisco staff have been working diligently and also in consultation with our board member from Frisco, Mr. Franklin, to understand what this service could look like to bring microtransit into Frisco. At first, what was identified was a zone that looks like what you see here outlined in purple. This comprises the commercial corridor of the city of Frisco, the Dallas North Tollway and Preston Road there north-south. And then as you get over into this area, you're more residential with Frisco Lakes. The map on the right-hand side is a land use map that shows a high concentration of single-family residential in yellow, but if you see where the purple and red are in light industrial retail, those vertical lines correspond with Dallas North Tollway and Preston Road. As we got through the conversation, we realized that what we learned with the launch of with Go Zone in Louisville, Highland Village, and Denton was you may not understand total demand until the service is actually launched. And let's make sure that we launch a service that will be able to meet demand and then expand if it needs to, rather than one that might be undersized when it first launches on day one. And so through that conversation, we came up with a recommendation that would shrink the initial zone to the area that's in blue, still comprising Preston Road, Dallas North Tollway, Frisco Lakes. And then once we see the service stabilize, then potentially expand it to the purple boundary and potentially beyond with a set capacity that's established at the outset.
Well,
Yes, sir.
is that 73 and 21? Is that the blue or is that the purple? The population area?
The commercial core zone up there is the 95,928 square miles. The blue zone is 73,4 and 21 square
And the
miles.
commercial core zone is the original that we would be looking to expand it to.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
The good news is the Go Zone service provides us a lot of data, as you all know, to make good decisions and understand how the service is performed. As I've explained it before, we have a pretty good idea about what happens when you make input on one side, what the output of the service is going to be. And so we're looking at things through this process like, what do we expect the productivity of the service to be? How many passengers per vehicle per hour? And then how much demand do we expect to come out of the service? And therefore that drives how many vehicles are needed to launch the service. Where we landed ultimately was identifying a productivity range somewhere around what we see in Louisville in the mid-3 rides per vehicle per hour and a demand of about 700 rides a day. What that led us to is a recommendation that says, let's budget for about 20 vehicles on day one. We may not need all 20 vehicles to meet the initial demand, but we feel comfortable that having capacity for 20 vehicles to provide service in reserve would allow us to put those vehicles out on the road as demand increases, and we wouldn't expect the demand to push our need for beyond 20 vehicles within that blue area. If it looks like we get demand met with 12 to 15 vehicles, let's say, in the blue area, then we could take those 5 extra vehicles that we have and deploy them in an expanded zone that could be out as far as that purple dotted line that you saw on the previous map. And so this is how the recommendation is coming together. And what that drives is a total cost on the Go Zone service at 2.7 million. And then by policy, under a contracted service, we need to leverage a 60% administrative fee in order to make sure that our DCTA operating costs are covered, which would drive a total contract cost of about $4.35 million a year. So where we stand today is now with this information, the Council of Governments and the City of Frisco are working together to identify funding sources and how the deal will be structured. And we would expect that then the COG would take that to the RTC and the city staff would take that to the City Council. And then a deal would be struck, but only if and once approved by the DCTA board. So the purpose of this briefing is really to give you an idea about how this is shaping up, to say we've done a lot of work to make sure the math plays out with regard to productivity and fleet size. By policy, we've got administrative fee covered, and so we're squared up there. And now we would just keep you apprised as we continue down the path on this 20 vehicle solution. Any questions, comments, thoughts about that?
Want to go ahead? I just had a thought. So, is there any discussion about I assume that this Go Zone in Frisco would be kind of a separate zone that you couldn't go between zones with. Is there any talk about a possible connection between the Louisville Highland Village zone and the Frisco zone?
Not within this conversation, but I think as we talked about in January at the strategic workshop, there could be a vision potentially for interconnected transit services that go all along the 121 corridor. If you imagine the map of Louisville, Highland Village, Frisco, and in between that is the Colony, there's lots of opportunity for that sort of thing. It starts right now. There are lots more unknowns get added into the equation. We talk about how many vehicles might move between zones and all that sort of stuff. So this would be the first step, I think, in a direction that could take us to that place.
Yeah. My thought was just that it doesn't necessarily have to be a Go Zone vehicle that's going between zones, but you know, if you're in Denton, you can get to the Louisville Helen Village zone by the train. Is there like a bus or something that could make, you know, at certain intervals throughout the day, make a connection between the two zones? Just a thought.
It's a great thought, and the idea that has come up in the conversations among staff is when you get data points of origin, destination, demand, then you can start to figure out how to more effectively connect those dots, just like we're doing in the intermediate service plan. We also have some idea about demand of moving between services that we see from, or between zones that we see through the span data set that we'll talk about here in a second. So there's, I think, a lot of opportunity once the data set in Frisco gets unlocked.
Paul, out of that 4.3 million, how much of that is COG dollars versus Frisco dollars? How's that funded?
I don't have a clear answer on that yet. That is the work that the COG staff is doing right now. They're in the midst of some internal transition on their staff side as well. So there's conversation about what is the cost share between the COG and the city of Frisco. How does the city of Frisco's contribution come to bear? Is it in cash or is it in TDCs? All those things are being discussed right now, but have not been resolved.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. The next item is related to a request that we have received for bus service in support of Texas Women's University. One of the things in our work plan for this year, or that has come up through the course of conversation in the strategic workshop, is how do the universities in Denton fit into our DCTA transportation network, and how do we work to make them as cohesive as possible? So we had a list of things to do, and one of those was outreach to TWU. And as fortune would have it, early part of May, I believe, TWU actually reached out to us, and they said, they are working with 2 apartment complexes that you see down here in yellow stars relative to where their campus is up here off of University. And they have leased blocks of rooms at these apartment complexes because they have no room to house students anymore on their campus. And so they called us and said, hey, we're going to have students living off campus. It's about a 3-mile trek from those apartments to the university. They may not have cars. Can you all provide a bus route? And so we are in the process of developing alternatives to consider a contract service with Texas Women's University that would provide connectivity between these apartment complexes and their campus. What I'm showing you right now was the preferred route that staff offered to Texas Women's University. Again, this conversation started middle of May and has come together very quickly. And so we gave a proposal to Texas Women's University that featured this route where you connect those apartment complexes, the bus makes a pass through the downtown Denton Transit Center and then ends on the campus and then goes back south. Now, one of the things that we talked about a lot through the intermediate service plan, as you recall, is the need to make a consistent, reliable network that operates all throughout the year. This ties to the intermediate service plan about moving the most people as cost effectively as possible, which often means fixed route bus in these areas. So we are trying to avoid creating a bus route for Texas Women's University that doesn't look and feel like the Connect service that you all just approved a couple of months or last month. However, the university has budgetary constraints and those sorts of things. And because of the timeline in which all this is coming together, we gave them an initial proposal. And this is what that initial proposal was. We would say, let's run this bus from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. weekdays. Let's run the bus on a 20-minute frequency. That time limit and that frequency aligns with the Connect 3, 6, and 7 service that we're going to be launching in August. And we would want to do that on a 3-year minimum contract. The reason is, number one, it takes time for bus service to be adopted by users. Also, we have to hire additional drivers in order to provide that service. And those drivers would be hired under the cost of the service. But we want to make sure that if we hire drivers, we have job work for them to do over a significant period of time. And we would target starting this in August of this year. The cost of that service would be $1.6 million, comprised of the cost of running that bus 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday on an annual basis, and then again adding the administrative fee on top of it. Our initial fee, when we gave this proposal to the university, they were intrigued, appreciated the service level that it offered, but it appeared to be beyond their current budget. So right now, the DCTA staff is working to develop alternatives that can meet the need, but also try to fit in with the network that we're trying to build so that we don't create another one-off as we're trying to reconcile with our 3, 6, and 7 and the University of North Texas. It's a delicate balancing act we're trying to fill, but the go, no-go decision needs to be made pretty soon on their end. So the way that I see this going is we've got some alternatives that we need to develop. We need to go back to them and say, okay, here's the options that are agreeable to us. If you all want to do this, then this agreement would be brought to the DCTA board in July for approval to start the service in August. Now, you all know we're also in the process of recruiting bus operators. We have 51 bus operators that have signed offers of employment with DCTA that are scheduled to start on July 22nd. And because of the wage and benefits increase that you all approved, we have 8 new operators who have been brought in the door, cleared background checks, and will be starting their training to begin service on July 22nd. And so all of these pieces are coming together very rapidly. It's all very exciting, but we just wanted to let you know where we stand in this conversation, and we'll keep you apprised and bring this back next month for an update, if not an approval or disapproval on this contract opportunity. Any questions about this or comments?
So it says target start date is August 2024. Classes would start when in August? Do we know? I mean,
About, I
if
think
we're gonna,
UNT classes are going to start August 12th. I think TWU is on either side of that.
okay, so it would have to be pretty rapid deployment.
Yes, sir. It is. And we're leaning forward, trying to do what we can to be a good partner for the university as they try to figure out how they're going to get these students to their campus.
Paul, have they given a rough order of magnitude of budget?
No, sir. I have asked that question, and they did not have a good answer for that. And so that is a consideration, you know. Is this even feasible from your perspective? I think that there's one more set of options that we can give them, and it may not work.
Yeah.
And in which case we would just say, let's keep our shoulder to the wheel and see what we can come up with for next school year. Yes, sir.
Is this going to require new bus stops and park or rider infrastructure?
There will be new bus stops required. Austin, do you know offhand how many?
Yeah, I think we planned
Oh,
for 18
yeah,
stops.
there you go.
I think about 14 or so of those 18 are new.
So those would be pole signs on an initial basis and then brought up to different levels.
I just wonder if that's going to require some coordination with this city, and that might be problematic this fast.
Yes, sir. We're working with the city right now on the intermediate service plan bus stop installations. There is a permitting process, all that sort of stuff. We would have to advise of a waiver sort of requirement before being able to say yes to this. But we are anticipating a collaboration here in order to serve a really important community partner. Any other questions? Okay. Final opportunity is related to span of Denton County and the partnership that is emerging between us. Earlier this year, the leadership from span of Denton County and the NCT COG came to our offices here and requested help to make sure that the right agency was moving the right trips. Specifically, span of Denton County had been providing trips to residents of member cities who were traveling within member cities or between member cities. So these should be DCTA trips. DCTA was glad to help by taking on those trips, and now all of those residents are being served by DCTA as of June the 1st. What you see on this table here is a data set of trips that are originating in either DCTA member cities or DCTA non-voting member cities, cities that are represented by this board of directors, where those trips originate and where those trips terminate. And this map is showing you where those cities are relative to our member cities. Overall, the span of Denton County data set for fiscal year 2023 shows a high degree of trips that are interacting with DCTA member cities. Over on the far right-hand side of the slide, what you see is 64% of all Flower Mound span trips either start or end within a DCTA member city. 78% of all Corinth span trips either start or end within a DCTA member city. With Frisco, it's a much lower number. Little Elm, though, 45% of all those trips And so we talked about how do we continue to work together on this? Recently, we got word that SPAN was no longer going to be able to provide trips that were helping people move from DCTA member cities to non-member cities. Specifically, what we heard was senior citizens in Louisville who go to the doctor in Flower Mound were told that they were not going to be able to provide that SPAN was not going to be able to provide those trips anymore. Of course, DCTA can't provide those trips because Flower Mound is not a member city. So the good news is that the Council of Governments found funding and made award to SPAN of Denton County to continue those trips for the near term. And when I say near term, between July 1st and about 12 to 18 months is the lifespan of the funds that they have available. However, DCTA said, let's not find ourselves in this position 12 to 18 months from now. Let's think about how we can work more closely together to make sure that any resident of Denton County within these cities who are availing themselves of these trips will continue to have that service. And so what that has led to is a conversation between SPAN, NCTCOG, and DCTA to think about how do SPAN service area boundaries look, how do DCTA service area boundaries look, and how does that relate to urbanized zones and rural zones and all those sorts of things so that we can strike some sort of interlocal agreement between the three parties, COG, DCTA, SPAN of Denton County, to make sure that the trips and the customers, number one, are taken care of, but that we're doing it as efficiently as we possibly can amongst the two transportation entities. And so no additional update here beyond that. Just wanted to make this available to you, put it on your radar that the conversation is happening, and let you know that we'll keep you posted as it develops. Any questions or comments on this?
I'll just say, I think it's a great partnership if we start looking at this, and I think it's very forward-looking of you to and your staff. You know, let's solve this, you know, now and not let it just be kicked down the road. Thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
I echo Cesar's comments, and I want to thank DCTA and also SPAN for the great work they've done all these years. And they've been a good partner to the county and to our citizens. And I appreciate the forward-looking approach on a partnership. So thank you, Paul.
Yes, sir.
I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that we are moving forward with this kind of a collaborative conversation, because the way it worked a few months ago, I'm gonna put on my mayor's hat. I had a lot of upset seniors that started hitting my out of nowhere. So yeah, we can't have that again. Folks need to have stability, and we need to make sure that SPAN and DCTA are solving that problem for the long haul, so that we're not bumping through this and disrupting so many seniors. So appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Okay, that's the end of this item. Thank you.
Item 2, discuss proposed fiscal year 2025 operating and capital budget and reserve policies. This is a discussion item, and we have our CFO, Sherelle Evans-Jones.
Yes, so you're gonna change the deck. Thank you. So I'll start by saying that we're taking a very collaborative and a super friends approach to delivering the budget presentation this year. I actually believe our initial slides start through with an executive summary from our CEO, and then we'll proceed through a deck of information that you have before you. It's worth mentioning that you have some pieces of information that are printed in paper at each of your places, and I'll just kind of orient you to those, and then we can proceed through the slides, because I think it may be helpful to bounce back and forth between these. First item is a change in net position with depreciation. So this is kind of helpful if you want to look at the budget numbers kind of by groupings in terms of general administrative, bus operations. You can kind of see them all grouped together in that way. Second page that you have before you is a capital improvement and major maintenance plan. There'll be some conversations that we'll get into where we'll be making reference to some of those items. Some of these items appear in ELPs or expanded level projects for this year. So this is kind of a helpful document to bop back and forth between. And then the third item that's before you is just, it functions very similarly to the change in net position, but it's the fully loaded, consolidated approach or look at the financial statements for DCTA all. And so that may be a helpful piece of information to you as we go through these slides. With that orientation, I think we can proceed.
Thank you very much, Sherelle, and it's great to be with you again for another budget workshop. Feels like in some ways, it doesn't feel like it's been a year since we've done this, but a lot has happened over the course of the last 12 months, and there's a lot of really good things to talk about. And so we look forward to getting into this conversation with you. It's just an outline, a roadmap of where we are going. And like Sherelle said, I wanted to start out just providing a 30,000 foot view of the financial performance of the organization relative to our outcomes, so that you all can get a good handle and grasp of where these dollars are going and the types of results that they're yielding. So with regard to the budget calendar, this is where we are in the process. We're in June giving you this briefing. We expect that we'll have a formal budget presentation and public hearing in August. Last year, you all approved the budget in August, which was great because it allowed us to get a good jump on fiscal year 2024. And so there's a formal adoption, and then we will come back around to start it all over again for fiscal 26. Safety, service, and ridership are the ways that we measure our core values. And so I'm going to touch on this just very briefly. This is always in your board packet. It's always front and center for the things that we're doing. And what we're looking for primarily is continuous year-over-year improvement. On the Go Zone side, incident frequency ratio last year, 0.65. So far through the end of May was 0.41. Steady progress, not as much as we'd like, but we've got a plan for that. And Steve Swanberg will help you hear more about that here in a little while. On the bus operation side, a really good story to tell. Last year, incident frequency ratio was, well, I apologize, last year 0.43 to 0.41 is the year over year. On the bus side, 0.84 on bus incident frequency ratio, now 0.59. So significant improvement year over year, and that's not by accident, which Steve will talk about here in a second. On the Rio Grande Pacific side, unfortunately, we had two FRA incidents related to personnel, not on trains, but working maintenance of way, working in the shop. And so we're happy to report that our partners at Rio Grande Pacific are addressing that, and we will continue to work with them in that regard. On the service side, we talked a lot about this over the course of the intermediate service plan and all that sort of thing. And the short answer is we're meeting our goals. We've balanced out seat unavailability between the zones. You can see that trend continued in May. We remain below the 24-minute threshold for wait time, but as demand increases, that wait time continues to tick up. And that's the reason you all approved the budget for additional bus frequency to make sure that we can continue to provide quality service. And on the fixed route side, we are right at over or at or below the 90% on-time performance threshold for fixed route. The story on access really was the installation of our electronic dispatching software and the automatic scheduling of trips that allowed us to make great improvements month over month between February and March to get our on-time performance on the access program where it is today. And then here's the part that usually gets all the headlines: ridership. This graph on the right, you're familiar with, we've talked about it a whole lot. The high water mark for travel on all modes at DCTA was in 2016 at 3.1 million rides. Through May of 2024, we stand at 2.3 million. It's a long, hot summer at DCTA. And what that means is our ridership usually dips pretty significantly corresponding to school years and things like that. But it always comes back really, really strong in September. By forecasting where we are today, year over year from a percentage basis, and what the months of June, July, August, and September were last year, we project a 3.3 million ride year by the end of the fiscal year. Of course, It's not in the bank. You can't count the chickens before they hatch, all the other cliches, like you say, but we are on a trajectory to do great things. That would be beyond the 2.9 million rides that we delivered last year. So let's talk about how ridership and this budget correlate. This table on the right-hand side, if you look at the columns, you're looking at adopted budget from fiscal 22 to 25, how that budget changed year over year, and then the actual OpEx, ridership and how ridership grew. The first thing you might say is, well, the budget was approved in 22 and 23, but the OpEx actual was greater. Why is that? Well, if you recall, we added significant capacity to the GO Zone system. We've added capacity to the bus system in those years. Those are dollars that went into the operation, and that's how we get to the 3.3 million ride projection that we saw in the previous slide. But here's what I want you to see as we go into this year's budget conversation. Actual OpEx in fiscal year 2022 is $53.1 million. Right, $53.1 million. Our proposed budget for this year is 52 million, 1.1 million less. Fiscal 22, 53.1 million rides generated, or dollars generated 2.2 million rides. A lower operating budget is going to deliver 50% more ridership year over between those 2 years. That is a significant and compelling story for our agency, and credit to the vision of this board and the work of the staff to deliver those kinds of results. And so when we think about value proposition for DCTA and what we're doing and how we're doing it, I think these numbers tell a really, really good story. How we think about the ridership forecast at 3.7 million, the headline says it. We anticipate the bus service and the A train is going to continue to lead the ridership recovery. We forecast UNT growth at about 12% year over year. It's been much more aggressive over the course of the last couple of years, but they said they're expecting their enrollment to kind of level out. The Connect service has been growing 77%, 80%. I don't expect that to happen, but I do think it's going to be more than the UNT service. So we put that at 25%. And then the A train continues to perform, up 16% this year, was up 28%. Last year. It's still in the top third of all commuter rail operations in the whole country for commuter rail ridership recovery. And so that 10% growth puts us at that 3.7 million trip number. Any questions about that? Okay, I'm happy to turn it over to Jane, who's going to take us through our next steps. Oh, I'm sorry.
We're not anticipating any increase in access. Obviously, that's something that's kind of capped by funding levels, right? Maybe this is a good question for Jane then. What opportunities are there for growth, right? Obviously, our population is growing. The overall number of disabled citizens that we're serving is growing. Is there any opportunity for increasing our funding levels so that we can also increase ridership?
It's a great question. I'm happy to answer that. I think the bulk of our work this year has been in the balancing of the GO Zone service and the fixed route bus service. And you saw the technical work that went into identifying cost of hours of operation and all that sort of thing. We need to turn our attention to that this year for access, in order to understand what is our ceiling for capacity in order to provide a better projection. I certainly do expect access to grow, but I don't have enough good data to give a good projection. And so that's the reason it's showing that. I do believe it's going to grow. It has continued to grow year over year. I didn't have enough to feel good about a projection. Make sense? Yes, ma'am. Any other questions? Okay, here you go, Jane.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Jane Florence. I'm the Senior Manager of Budget and Grants here at DCTA. Really, really quick, I just want to thank every department for their work on the budget this year. Every department worked really hard this spring to get and turn in a great budget, and then it turned into budget workshops. The next group I want to thank is Paul, Sherelle, and Maurice for all their dedication to the budget this year, to putting that together. We had multiple meetings to be able to pull this off. And especially want to thank Dawn Jones, who's part of the finance team now. She's been exceptional since she's been here, and I couldn't have done it without her. So just real quick before I start, I couldn't start without doing that first. So what I'm going to do for you guys is kind of take you through the budget on a high level. And then you'll see as the presentation goes on, it's going to be broken down into smaller levels that speak back to these higher numbers. So this is kind of, I'm going to give you the groundwork slides and then Sherelle will take you through revenues and then it'll get a little more granular from there. So this is the 4-year outlook for revenue and expenses. And if you start at the top there with federal, state grant, I'm sorry, federal and state grants. For this particular year, we're coming at 14.7 million. The reason that we're there is because we really looked at operating expenses and what we could reasonably expend within FY 25 and tied those back to the grant revenues that we knew that we could get and already have actually for right now. And that boiled down to 14.7. There's more grant revenue to be had. It's just we were trying to be realistic in what we could spend in this given year. Sales tax comes in at 41 million, which is just a slight increase, about a 2.5% increase over last year. The reason being for that is that we've been watching how it's been trending this year, and the Texas Comptroller site is about 2 months in arrears from where we are now. We're about at 20 million so far. We're expecting to be at 40.7 by the end of this year. So we felt like a conservative approach on sales tax was the best approach for us to take to present for the budget. Then operating revenues is made up of passenger revenues and contract revenues. You'll see that that went from 8.4 to 6.1. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is we also really try to tie that back to actual expenses. In the past, we were taking information that we were given from the individuals that we do with for the contracts, but this time we really were looking at expenses and then tying it back to what the revenue should be. So that's why we came in at 6.1. And there's a little more information to come up on another slide on that where we can explain that a little further. And then your non-operating revenue is primarily made up of investment income. It's the money that we invested in 2023 that we're seeing nice gains from here in 2024. And so we decided to bump that up from a $2 million to a $2.2 million. And then TAM is something that we started talking about last year. It's Transit Asset Management. It's more or less the money that's in our bank that we've been building. It's kind of like putting money in your piggy bank to go buy that great toy that you want as a kid. And our toys are our capital projects. And so we've been saving up that money knowing that coming soon, which is this year, we would start to need to utilize some of that money for the capital projects that start this year and then build out in future years for things like bus fleet replacement, rail cars, things like that in future years. So you'll see 1.6 and 1.3 million dollars there, making up total revenues of 66.9. Then operating expenses, there's a lot more detail in future slides about this, but it's just like what it sounds. It's made up of your M&O, things like salary, wages, benefits, insurance, purchase, transportation, making up the $52 million for operating expenses. Your debt services is a contractual number. And so that's largely unchanged. It's kind of like having your mortgage. And so it's a steady $2 million there. And then capital expenses, less trip, you can see off to the right there, each of the capital projects that represent that $12.9 million. To add up, there's a lot more detail that's coming in the capital spreadsheet, in addition to the ELPs that will be presented here before too long, to make up that 12.9 to explain what each of those projects are so you can decide on those with us. So that brings total expenses to 66.9, giving us a net cash balance of 0. And then with TRIP, it's 7.8. There's a lot more details that will come in a little bit more in this meeting, but more in the July meeting with the long-range financial plan about the TRIP number and how that number is derived, giving us a net cash of 7.8, including TRIP. Any questions on that slide? This is budget adjustment drivers, revenues, and expenses. Oh,
All right, I did.
backwards.
What constitutes operating revenue and why are we seeing that drop down? And you may have explained it and I missed it.
There, I'm gonna jump in. There's actually a whole pack of revenue slides that I'll walk you through shortly.
Thank you.
She's a super friend. All right, budget adjustment drivers. This is a way to look at the drivers for both revenues and expenses with just a little more detail. And then again, there'll be more beyond this, but passenger revenues there you can see is 1.6. That's up from 1.4 last year. The major drivers for that are GO Zone, rail, bus, and Collin County rides. And of course, Collin County rides is new to us this year as of February, and we'll be continuing that program on into FY25. So that's something that you wouldn't have saw last year, but you're seeing for this year. Then contract revenues is 4.4 million. The drivers for that's UNT, Frisco, and Collin County rides primarily. The reason that there's a decrease there is because in FY 25 we will not have the Trinity Metro Alliance service program, and that's being consumed by Trinity Metro again. So that is part of the reason that there's a decrease in that particular area. And then sales tax revenue, as I mentioned, is 41 million there. And the investment income, same as 2.2, so we're going up from 2 to 2.2 there. And then grant funding at 14.7. The way we have broken it down is 4.3 million into capital grants, again, tie back to expenses that we know are capital expenses we have for this coming year, and 10.4 for federal operating grants. So that covers revenues on there. And then onto expenses is DCTA salaries, wages, and benefits at 6.5 million. This is a neat story to tell, I think, at least. It's leveled to FY 24 despite knowing that we have benefit increases for this next year. As you can see reflected on the slide, it does include, and then it also assumes a 5% merit pool increase. It does include 3 new positions for this coming year, whereas last year was 7 positions. And then as you recall, we had a lot of, we removed and readjusted kind of our org structure last year to try and create one that would allow us to be able to handle the expanded services that we're starting to see. Bus operations is NTMC. It's what we're calling the former NTMC. So it's salary, wages, and benefits. That's a $250,000 increase. They have the same benefits increase that we have. And this will be, FY 25 will be the first full fiscal year that they're under the DCTA umbrella. It also assumes the operator pay adjustments that was mentioned in the previous board meetings. And there's 2 new positions you'll see that are being requested under the former NTMC side. And this is, there'll be more employees as part of the retirement program. So that's some of what makes up the reason for that $250,000 increase in that particular category. Yes.
It says 205 or
205, I'm sorry, 205,000. Thank you. Purchase transportation is 25.1 million. The main drivers there are Rio Grande for rail and Go Zone, VIA for Go Zone. Those make up the vast majority of it, but you also have a bit under mobility as a service, Collin County rides, and a few others to make up that purchase transportation cost of 25.1. These are contractual cost obligations that we have with those entities. And then materials and supplies is another neat story to tell. It's 3.4 million. 2 million of that is fuel. And what we really did as a team this year when we were evaluating everything is how has fuel looked over the years? And we feel like it's been a bit high. And you know, when filling up your car, it's a little bit scary sometimes, but we really try to look at it and see if we could reduce it a bit. And we realized that we could. So for bus fuel, we've reduced that to $3.50 per gallon from what was $4 a gallon. And then for rail, we've reduced that to $4.50 a gallon from what was $5.25 a gallon in the past. And we still feel like we should be okay with the fuel amount. And then employee development, this is the one that's that persnickety one that has contingency in there. It had a $300,000 contingency in there for FY 24. It actually has the same contingency built in for FY 25. That is contingency, if you recall, is for insurance claims. So ironically, when we set that up last year, even just starting in November, we had a claim for rail that happened almost immediately in the beginning of the fiscal year. And we were able to use this contingency money to pay for that. And then the money comes back into a revenue account that is not within the employee development line, it's in a revenue line. So, but we found that it was beneficial to have that kind of money set aside for those unforeseen things that happened during the year. So that leaves $483,000 of employee development for the agency as a whole for the year, which the reason that it's a bit higher than last year, but it's because we are fully staffed now. We have people who've been in their positions for a number of months or to a year now that are seeing where they can have areas of development and growth and have asked for those training opportunities. And so we've built that in for opportunities for that for the coming year. Any questions on this slide? All right. This is the DCTA budget summary. This one's kind of neat because you can kind of see the whole budget on one slide because you're seeing the operating budget, the capital budget, and debt services. So if you're just looking at operating budget, demand response directly operated is kind of just exactly like what it sounds. It's all of our directly operated, all of our demand response entities, which are things like Access, Frisco, and then demand response for our member cities. That represents $1 million. And then our fixed route is for our fixed routes like UNT Shuttle, North Texas Express Access. That represents $5 million. And then we move into Go Zone, Collin County Rides, similar programs, 11 million and 454, and then contracted mobility as a service, which is things like van pool, UNT late nights, Coppell Lift. And then bus administrative support services is more of your organization that supports the services. So that represents 6.7. A-Train is everything, everything trains, salaries and operations, and then G&A is 9.9. Our capital budget this year is coming in at 24.4, and there's more details on that and exactly how that looks. Plus you have the printout at your space there of all the capital budget for the whole year. And then debt services is that steady 1.9, around $2 million. And then that table that you see near the bottom is trying to show you the representation of G&A to op expenses. So $9.9 million against a $52 million budget, or 19% of the budget. So the key number here right now is our operating budget of $52 million that Paul had mentioned in his previous slide. Questions on that before I move on? This is a capital budget summary. You don't necessarily be able to read that, but like I said, you have it at your space, and there's a more detail. There's two actually slides so you can see it better in the future slides coming up. But basically what we want to show you is what actually is off to the right, the key players and what's making up the numbers this year, which is fleet replacement. So we're looking at 3 40-foot buses, and then that TAM approach, we are continuing to add that into the capital budget, knowing that that is something that we're going to need to be able to use some of that net cash money for projects from here to the next few years is our plan. The Old Town TOD is one that you saw last year. It's also called infrastructure acquisition, or it's also known as our new building that we're working on. So that is what that is. That's a continuation from last year. So is the ERP implementation. We are fully amidst having meetings, trying to get this ERP off the ground. And that's a continuation of last year as well. The electronic security passenger signage is a rollover from FY24. It's a project we presented in 24 that was approved, that we will either kick off at the very, very end of 24 or start it up in FY25. And then rail major maintenance and dispatch software is something called Railcom that we'll present to you as an ELP. Maurice will present that and explain what that is about. Is in addition to the IT projects, those will be a couple of ELPs that Javier will represent here in just a bit. Questions on capital overview? I'm gonna skip this one because you have it, because the next one's the exact same thing. The only thing is this one includes is depreciation. The other one doesn't. But beyond that, they're a mirror image of one another. And the reason I'm picking the one with depreciation is because depreciation is not represented in a ton of these slides, but it is in this one. But this is what Sherelle had touched on. And so basically, this is a way to be able to see kind of things lumped together. So at the top, you'll see passenger revenues and operating revenues, and how those are broken out, representing $6 million there over the passenger revenue contract revenues. And then G&A and the bus services, mobility, rail, they all have the different categories like salary, wages, outsourced service, and charge, and material and supplies. That way you can kind of see that lumped up. These are broken out in slides coming up that will explain a little bit more about what key areas are that are up or down from last year. So G&A as a whole is the 10 million, bus operations is 13.3. Mobility services, we had it in there last year, but we only had just a little bit of Go Zone in there. This year, we decided to separate it out a little bit more because to separate it out from bus and from rail. And it represents Go Zone, mobility as a service, Collin County Rides, and Lyft. And because we're trying to show that a little bit separate from, it was tied up in bus last year, and it made more sense to start to separate it out, start to understand things by mode more than lumped all together. And then rail operations to the right for 26 million with the total operating expenses with the depreciation of 62.8. If we were showing it to you without depreciation, it would be the 52 million. Down to the non-operating revenues. And then there's no transfer out this year because NTMC is now part of our family under our umbrella. So we wouldn't be transferring out to them because we're all one now. Any questions on change in net? All right, so now we'll move on to breaking down the revenues for you, and Sherelle's going to walk you through that.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, so revenues. Before we get into the revenues, I wanted to bring a little bit of color around some of the things that Jane talked about. You heard about mobility as a service, as a service line, and there was some cost included within bus, and we're working to put like things in like buckets. That is a further that represents a further refinement of our understanding of how all of these things are coming together. It also represents a planning for the future, because as we're sitting in this room working through in so many letters, ELPs, ERPs. So as we're sitting in this room actively, we're about a quarter of the way through the transition to our new financial software. And what we're thinking about is the way that data and security access is going to make it necessary to have like things and like buckets a lot better and a lot tighter. So what we're trying to do with this budget is begin to question, does this make sense? Why is this in this area? And trying to put more and more things as we're becoming more astute at where different things are in those buckets. So some of it is, it makes sense to do it because it makes sense to do it, but some of it is we're planning for the future. On to revenues. $64.2 million broken out in the areas that you'll see, and we'll spend some time. Jane gave you just an overall look at all the areas, and as she mentioned, we'll dig more into details on all of those different areas. This $64.2 million actually represents, like if you were to lay the two budgets side by side from last year, the approved budget number for FY24 was like $74.3 million, $10 million drop. Remember that last year's number included a $10 million estimate for the JROF. So largely we are moving within the same areas in terms, some things are going down, some things are going up, et cetera. With the large driver of the revenue being sales tax revenue, and also some of our grant revenue, you see between the 10.4 million and the 4.3 million on capital grants. What we did with this budget in particular, in terms of the revenue, is if there is a revenue item that is built based on expenses, contracted services, we have core expenses for the members, the individuals that we provide contracted services for. If that revenue is based on expenses, and we have a certain amount of additional administrative fee that we charge for that. We went back even harder and looked at what those underlying expenses are, and does that make sense with the amounts that we are putting in for contracted revenue. Sometimes when we're looking at some of the budgeted numbers from last year compared to this year, specifically with contracted services, some of those numbers represent information that came into us as we're having something transition to us. But now that we got actuals, we began to base those revenue items based on the actual revenue, not what the previous entity that was servicing those agencies provided us, if that makes sense. So key areas, this is just a pictorial representation of many of the things that Jane has already covered. Okay, so let's get a little bit more into detail as to what all is going on. So this is a slide I told you was coming up, and why things are decreasing and changing, et cetera. So my mind looks for big numbers. So I'm going to spend time talking about some of the big numbers and some of the larger changes. But if there's anything that I missed or that I didn't cover, we're happy to cover those things. So first up that I see is bus operations revenue, fixed route directly operated. a $435,000 reduction. That is based on, that is our UNT contract. You have heard some conversations from Paul Christina in the earlier session about, and the conversations that are ongoing with UNT. You will see some slides to come about where we are with the UNT evolution. What this number is based on is the number for base number of service hours that we intend to provide, multiplied times our currently agreed to contractual rate. But this is something in particular that is an active matter that we are working with our partners at UNT to work through. What you should expect, so right now, what you have before you is a draft of the budget based on the best available information that we know. What you just heard was information that says we're still having conversations on this thing. We know that this other area that impacts revenue is something that we expect to hear back from July. So what you should expect to see is, as we come back to you with different glimpses of the budget, that as we gather more information, we will be factoring those things into those estimates. So that was the first area. In terms of another area of movement here, Collin County rides. So this is one that came into play during this particular fiscal year, so it doesn't have a number represented for the adopted budget. It was not included in the adopted budget. Mobility as a service has decreased by 598,000, and that reduction is primarily due to the conclusion of that service that we were providing through Trinity Metro. And so that is just, it represents a reduction of revenue, and that's the major movement here. So it represents a reduction of revenue. It also represents a reduction of expenditures. You know, it's just basically coming out of our overall plans, okay? And another area, demand response directly operated under our mobility services, you see $112,000 increase there. And that is what we're looking at in terms of our services that we're providing and growth that we're seeing. So this is an area where we're looking at and we're watching our actual numbers compared to what we put down in budget. And it's the actuals this year are giving us data that tells us that the future year, the upcoming year's revenue, we can increase that a little bit. Okay. So those are the areas that are key areas of movement that we have within these particular revenue items. But I want to pause and see if there's anything in particular or any follow-up questions or anything that I can help with.
I have a quick question, real.
Okay.
Maybe it's an explanation on the CCR, the 46,683, that matches the revenue for passenger revenue is 46,663 for Collin County Rideshare. So is there any additional revenue that's being produced other than passenger revenue for Collin County Rideshare? And also, what are you anticipating the 198 becoming? Is that 198,000 of passenger revenue, or are there any other revenue streams that we're getting from the Collin County Rideshare program?
Yes, so Collin County Rides, are you asking that because this number has a note on it, that you see it as?
Well, in
all
the
passenger?
previous slides, it showed Collin County passenger revenue was 46,000.
Right,
And the total operating expense for Collin County Ride is 450,000.
right.
Where's
We
the
are
difference?
Okay, thank you. It appears in the grants because those are funding areas that come in from the COG and so it appears in the grants. Mhm. Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, so included within some of the non-operating areas, we talked a little bit about investment income now. As we're putting together a budget, there's areas, let's level with each other. There's areas where I'm like extremely courageous, and there's areas where I don't want to be out there too far. this area represents a non-courageous, I don't want to bet the farm on because you don't know what's going to happen in some of those investment, pools and in some of those investment areas. So we're showing you that actuals right now are doing fantastic. Is that an area where we want to presume that we're going to continue to have that? The budget works without, depending on that much, if that makes sense. So we only budgeted or proposed to increase that number by 200,000 as opposed to leaning into the full amount. So in terms of some of the other areas, you might remember me saying when we looked at the slide with the big pie chart that there was a $10 million reduction in an area related to JROC. This is where it shows up in the miscellaneous revenue area. It was budgeted in 2024. We have changed our plans in terms of the joint rail operation facilities, and this would have been the payment that would have covered the capital expansion that was discussed. Sales tax revenue, all of our data right now is showing us, so we're showing in this column here, 2024 projected budget, we're showing a 40.7 million. That's what we believe will come in roughly during this particular year. And so we're projecting a very slight increase, but not much on sales tax revenue. And then in the federal grant area, so this $14.7 million is based on us looking at the expenditures that are locked and loaded in the budget and what things qualify for being able to be expended and requested in terms of the types of grants that we have available to us. So we went through from a capital perspective and from a operating perspective and looked at all of those amounts to see which ones qualify, and we came to a total of 14.7. As Jane's comments indicated, there are a lot more other, the balances remain that should we have additional expenditures, we can increase that amount, but we wanted to more closely tie the expenses that are approved by this body to the revenue that we can actually seek reimbursement for, if that makes sense. Just checking my notes to see if I had planned on saying anything else. Are there questions here before I move forward? Okay. Well, up next, our next super friend is coming in, Mr. Maurice Bell. And he's going to talk with you about a lot of different components of the operations related expenditures. So we're going to the other side of the ledger. We're leaving revenue. We're going to expenditures.
Thank you, Sherrill. Mr. Chair, members of the board, I guess I'm the super friend now. So I'm going to do my best to share with you the details of each one of our operating departments. Starting off with our mobility services, if you take a look at that bottom line, the total mobility services and expenses from FY24 to FY25, we're looking at $158,000 savings. A lot of that is comprised around the the salary, wages, and benefits, as well as the outsourcing of services and down to the purchase transportation. If you take a look at the top left, you can see, or the top right, excuse me, you can see the salaries and wages. I happen to be one of those like things and like buckets, and you'll see that throughout this, to where we ended up adding in our Collin County Rides representative, as well as our new senior manager of mobility services. So that was the reason for the increase there. And of course, my funding from my position itself is spread between each of our mobility modes that we currently have. And so that's one of those like things and like buckets that Sherrill referred to. As you go into the purchase transportation, you can see there was a decrease of over 432,000. That piece there has a lot to do with the Trinity Metro Alliance program that we were operating, that we came to you a few months ago and asked for an increase because it was increasing in service. But now Trinity Metro has asked to take that back in-house and is currently providing it with their zip zone agreement with VIA as well. Now, moving on to the next. This is a little bit more of a breakdown of the mobility services piece from UNT to Collin County Rides, Frisco, Capel, Guaranteed Ride Home, our van pool, as well as our Go Zone. But the area that I want to focus your attention on is the area over here to your far right, where we talk about administrative fees. That's where we're recovering close to, with the pass-throughs as well as the 69% fees. We're generating roughly $440,000 in annual for this year. When you add that into with the Capel as well, in the bottom of your screen, another 45,000. The one to note is that we have our taxi service providers, which are providing roughly 77% of these services since March of this year. While our Lyft program providers are providing close to 23%. So now if we move on to the next piece, which is our Go Zone services. As you can see here, we have an increase, of course, from FY 24 to 25, from 42, a rate change per hour of 42.11 to 42.95. We also seeing, based on your approval, for additional hours of roughly 300 hours a week, we have a 6.6% increase for services in FY 25 there. Now, the one piece that we are continuing on from this fiscal year into the next is the customer service model, where we have the option of making changes to that, where we have 2 6-month options in that situation. And we're continuing that effort with the approval and, of course, hiring of a new customer service manager. We're still working with Go Zone to identify all those key areas that we need to provide good customer service feedback to our folks in the future. So now moving on to the rail expense. Last year, or FY 24, we were budgeted at 17 million. We have a little bit of a savings here of roughly 718,000 for the course of FY 25. Now, all of that has a lot to do with the material supplies, insurance, and purchase transportation. If you take a look here on the material supplies, last year, we ended up budgeting $5.25 a gallon for our fuel, and we're changing that to $4.50 a gallon to make sure that we're more efficient with these funds. But in addition to that, we removed the fuel allocations for the DART Silver Line, since that is transitioned out. And then, of course, going into the purchase transportation, there's an increase of over 426,000, roughly 3.6%. And that has a lot to do with percentage increases due to agreements in place, as well as the ILA with DART, and of course, our PTC operating structure. And here's a little bit more of a breakdown on the contract details, from units to FY 25 rates. As well as our FY 25 totals. As you can see here at the bottom of your screen, we have $11,975,000. That does not include this $200,000 in PTC maintenance, as well as the $50,000 member city service request contingencies. And that is basically when we are asked by our member cities to provide services with the rail for additional hours, like 4th of July or the eclipse, things of that nature. We end up wanting to make sure that we have some additional funds set aside to provide those that doesn't impact the budget negatively. And then over here, we're looking at the rest, and this is more of a summary of our operating expenses. Our fuel costs, as we showed earlier, we dropped that down to $4.50 a gallon. Total operation fuel budget is at 1.1 million. But the piece that we spoke of earlier in regards to insurance, that was an increase of over 85,000 based on liabilities, property damage, vehicle insurance. And of course, we spoke to a little bit about the ILAs and our maintenance agreements, which I'm going to go into on the next slide, some of our capital maintenance programs. This is a slide that this has been shared before. This slide here speaks to the history of our rail system, as well as projecting out to FY 30. If I draw your attention to the last column there, the total column, you can see last year we budgeted at 2.3 million. This year we are scheduled to go with 3.1 million. And as you can see, some of the aging of our system, as well as repairs, routine maintenance, we are projecting out over the course of the next 5 years to see some increases, but we're working closely with our contractor and all of our parties to make sure we're being fiscally responsible and trying to control this so it doesn't get out of control. Part of that involves this piece here, which you've seen before. It involves the detailed maintenance pieces for our GTWs onto tracks. But the area that I want to focus your attention on is the area of signals, specifically the signal housing and electric power and the remote monitoring. That has been a 2-year project. That project involves installing monitoring systems in all of our signal housing in order to better understand the peak temperature changes and cold changes that those equipment go through, so we can try and anticipate some of the failure rates of these pieces of equipment. We are in the next phase of that. They've already started the installations. Though unfortunately, there's about a 6-month lead time on purchasing the equipment. And so now we are going forth and purchasing the rest of this into FY25 to finish that installation. And it's going to benefit everything within those signal housing areas. Yes, sir.
What inflation rate are you using for that long-term planning?
Ooh, that's a good question, Sherelle.
The inflation rate for the long term, so on the previous slide,
Yes, ma'am.
that is not an inflation rate. That is based on our third party, our Rio Grande Pacific providers looking out into the future. So that's an amount that they've provided us each year. So next year, when we do 2026, we will have more in-depth conversations with them to go, okay, what is all of this visually impaired, $5.8 million? What is included in all of this? And refining that to figure out which components we need. It's not based on an inflation. It's based on specific items that they
Yeah,
think. need
something to
be.
consider. I would suggest to inflate it out, but that's just me.
Yeah, that's good. That's good feedback. And I want to provide a little more commentary on that point. If you could go back one more time. So what we asked Rio Grande Pacific to do is give us worst case scenario, everything breaks all at once. What would it take to maintain the A train? And that's how I consider that number. Then we get into the conversation as it gets closer. Okay, what do you really think is going to be required for fiscal year 2025? And then we have a very in-depth conversation about how do we manage risk of what happens if this thing fails? How does it impact service? And do we have a workaround so that we're spending only the dollars that we need to maintain the service? I would say they inflate their numbers pretty fairly with regard to HVAC renovations, engine and generator repairs, all that sort of stuff, but certainly could consider how we began this year, identifying what is their inflation rate, because that's kind of baked into their number. And so we're starting to be able to understand that a little bit more as well. So.
My concern is if you're using just like the consumer price index, that's probably not a good inflation rate to use because this is a metals heavy industry. Metals have a very different inflation rate than consumer goods.
Right.
So they may be pricing it today, but if we're thinking about what do we need to raise in 2030,
Yes, sir.
that might be something I just want to consider.
Yes, sir. Thanks, sir.
All righty. So moving on to the next slide, we have our EOP program. This involves the replacement of our current dispatch system. This is going to be a 2-year project. Right now, currently, Wabtec is our provider of software for dispatch. This unfortunately is no longer being supported by Wabtec. And so we have a very important need to transition away. This, however, gives us the opportunity to get into improving the technology in this area to allow us to be able to work seamlessly with our PTC system. And so this is going to be a much needed program here for rail in the coming years. Now moving on to bus. Last year, for FY24, our budget was set for 11.1 million. And this year we're going to 12.4, 12.5. And that has a lot to do with the transition of NTMC into the DCTA family. Majority of that, as you see there in the salaries and benefits, that's where the increase is. It's a 1.15 million. And so I'm going to share a little bit more detail into the next slide here. This is a big piece. As we talked about before, we've gone over the different pieces that involve the salary increases, being competitive, wanting to make sure we're recruiting the appropriate folks. Well, here we see a need to actually add in 2 additional positions for road supervisors. But in addition to that, we have the benefits portion that is actually creating an additional 16% increase to justify the 1.1 million. Now over here, this is a breakdown of the supervisor currently staffed. We have 6. Right now, you can see they're working tirelessly. I mean, they're working hard between 50 to 62 hours a week. And what we've learned is right now with our staffing challenges and the support that they're giving, they're not able to provide the true functions of a supervisor. And so it's actually costing us an additional $400K a year. And so that's why we're proposing to switch to an 8 supervisor staffing to reduce that cost, as well as provide more coverage, and of course, ensure that these operators are performing our supervisors are performing the role as a supervisor and being flexible to be able to assist with timesheets, safety reviews, audits, you name it, concierge in the field to customers looking to get to where they need to go.
Question
Yes,
on that previous slide. So were they being paid overtime? Is that?
yes, they were.
That's what was causing the increase. Okay.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
So here, this is a breakdown of our miles and fuel. We're still showing strong on the dead and fixed route piece as well as the UNT, but the area I'll draw your attention to is, of course, the Frisco demand response. We no longer have any miles associated with that in FY25 because that's when we made the transition of that service over to our TNC portion, which is Yellow Cab, who is our current contractor for that. And so we brought back all of our DCTA assets to provide those access vehicles back into the fold for our member cities. And so, of course, that's reduced the amount of fuel as well as mileage and wear and tear on those vehicles into next year and for the years to come. So our overall fuel budget that we've changed is down to $3.50 per gallon. And it's bringing us to a total fuel budget of $869,000 for FY25. Here's another breakdown of the details for UNT. The rate has changed to $72.25 with late night service to $63.20. And as you can see, the total revenue base is down there. It's at 3.7 million. And as you'll hear a little bit later, Paul's going to share the details of everything from the UNT plans and how we plan to change those. This is a continuation of that, where you see with a total revenue of 3.7 million on down to the overall finish of over 440,000 to conclude the UNT contract details. If there is any other questions, I'll be passing it on to our next superhero.
Thank you for keeping with mine now.
Well, this is Captain America coming up, so I'm not.
Come on, man. Come on. Well, Captain America doesn't need glasses. I think. So, right, those superheroes, they don't degrade over time. Well, wanted to take the opportunity in this budget conversation to talk about our University of North Texas contract because it's so central to what we do inside the bus operation. 90% of all of our ridership is associated with the UNT contract. Now, as the Connect service grows, I think that will be offset, but it's a significant driver of ridership. It's a significant driver of cost, and it needs to be an equally significant driver of revenue. And so one of the things that we focused on this year is understanding what is this UNT contract that we have that was struck most recently in 2019. It's on a 10-year basis with a price schedule for hourly cost of services. What is it paying for? What is it not paying for? And how does it address our current state of operations? And so the agreement is very optimistic and visionary in its approach, that it's about strengthening the relationship between DCTA and UNT. It's about making sure that value is recognized from both sides. It's about maximizing ridership and minimizing total cost of delivery. It's about thinking about innovative approaches to transportation, hubs, improving service delivery, all that sort of thing, and also transparency and cost. And so where we find ourselves in this 10-year agreement, originally struck September of 2018, is that in the 6th year of the contract, it says, which is actually September 1st of this year, it says this contract can be readdressed and renewed. The contract also says the service costs are solely a projection, and if actual costs exceed the projection, the parties shall work together to figure out what's the right cost of service and then amend the contract accordingly. So all the homework that we did through the intermediate service plan and that memo that you remember Sherelle shared with you to understand what's the hourly cost of service for the Go Zone operation, for Connect, for UNT, all of that homework bears on this conversation. So, and I will say, we have found our partners at University of North Texas to be extremely open-minded to this conversation. They, like us, are somewhat new to this agreement. They weren't, the same people were not at the table when the agreement is struck. They understand the circumstances bearing on us are also bearing on them, and they have been fully willing to engage in the discussion, and we're grateful for that. And everything that I'm sharing with you today has been shared with them in individual conversations. So what we did was we looked at our fiscal year 2023 budget and actuals to understand what did we say the budget was going to be for the cost of service, and then what did we actually realize with regard to revenue. And so total contract value, $3.3 million. We didn't deliver quite as much service as we thought we would, but we met all our objectives. And so you see revenue of 3.2, expenses of 2.0. So you net some cash. If you were to divide, this over this, you would see an administrative fee of something less than 60%. And then we set aside this capital reserve that's in the capital budget for the replacement of buses, not actually a contractual requirement. It's just something that we've known, and that's where that $400,000 a year come from. And so net revenue to DCTA after all is said and done. One of the other things, though, we have to consider that's a little more opaque is ridership drives grant revenue from the federal government. Ridership on the UNT service drives ridership on the A train, drives ridership on the Connect service, all that sort of thing. So there are intangibles that are harder to measure that also bear weight in this conversation. On the other side of the ledger, what you see are actual costs, and the big number there is $6.5 million. And if you compare $6.5 million to $3.1 million in revenue, you say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't add up. And you would be right. But the reason this number is what it is because it's based off of a service hour of $67.50. The math work that we did through the technical guidance document showed us that basically the UNT contract and that hourly rate was paying for marginal cost of service in 2018. Now, the contract does escalate 3% year over year, but does anybody doing a budget where it's just been 3% year over year since 2018? We aren't either. So that's where the conversation has begun with the University of North Texas. So the question is, how do we fix that? Well, we need to figure out how to do things more efficiently. The same hard work that this board asked our agency to do, we are trying to ask the University of North Texas to do the same thing. We look at ridership on their individual routes, the utilization of those individual routes, and asking the question, is this the best use of this service hour? While also looking at what is the cost of that service hour and what are we being paid for? This is going to look familiar to you because it's the same graphic that we talked about in the intermediate service plan, except now you've got the top 5 ridership routes on the University of North Texas. Discovery Park, which goes up to the Discovery Park campus, the Colorado Express route that goes down to the station at Med Park, and then Bernard Street, Center Place, and Daughtry Street that are right there in the core of all those apartment complexes and stuff right off campus. Remember in the intermediate service plan conversation, we showed you that if you take all the GO zone capacity out of 3, 6, and 7, you can take GO zone capacity and do something else with it. If you look at this as a network of 8 routes, connect 3, 6, and 7, and those top 5 University of North Texas routes, it represents about $2.6 million of GO zone capacity every year. On a $50 million operating budget, that's a big nugget. So the question for UNT is, how do we take this data and how do we allow it to drive different decision-making on service planning on the University of North Texas bus route? One other thing that I've observed since I've been here is that the planning process at UNT is very collaborative, but somewhat focused on University of North Texas. Well, I think that we ought to be talking about how do these University of North Texas routes interact with our entire network. One of the challenges we have is during the summer schedule for University of North Texas, frequency drops, service is less available, therefore ridership goes down. Well, we talked about the intermediate service plan. If you want people to ride the bus instead of GO zone, you have to maintain a consistent frequency that's available all the time, consistent schedule. Why should the University of North Texas do this? Well, this graph here is showing you from fiscal year 2023, October 1, all the way to September 30th, ridership on blue is Discovery Park, orange is Center Place, green is Bernard Street, one of these routes in here, and then 3, 6, and 7 are through there. The ridership on Go Zone inside of this travel shed is the black line. Now look at how all the bus ridership dips in the summer. Well, is that because students aren't on campus, or is that because the bus service is not frequent? As the demographics of the student population shift and they become more international and stay year round, the hypothesis is there's demand for transit services, and the Go Zone rides tell us that there are, because look how the black line stays the same all the way across the board. The University of North Texas contract does not recognize Go Zone cost. 50% of all the Go Zone rides in the city of Denton start or end within a quarter mile of the University of North Texas campus. So you begin to, I'm framing for you the opportunity that DCTA and the University of North Texas have to figure out how do we right size the service in order to make sure that they get the services that they need and DCTA gets the value that it's delivering. Make sense? So what might that look like? Well, it's about two different things. It's about what's the hourly rate and how do we get to a full year schedule? Because now if you think about, you all voted to take 3, 6, and 7, Go Zone capacity out of 3, 6, and 7 and do something else with it. Well, what if you took Go Zone capacity out of a much broader area? Now you could do something else with that. Now there's all sorts of opportunities for that $2.5 to $3.5 million nugget of Go Zone capacity and the cost that goes along with it. So the conversation with the University of North Texas is how do we get these top 5 UNT routes to run year round? What's the value to UNT paying for more bus service in the summer or paying for the $2.5 million of Go Zone capacity that's within a quarter mile of the campus, while also pushing on the hourly rate? Now, our analysis in the technical guidance document said the full cost, that is recognizing the fixed cost of bus service plus the marginal cost of service, is about $160 an hour. Well, the contract rate for 2025 is $72. There's a big gap. What this is showing you is we would have to be pretty aggressive on year over year increases to get to that level, $162 by the end of the term. I'm not expecting that we will be able to come to an agreement on closing that gap in that period of time. But what I do expect is that we can figure out how to move the needle on both of these different components in order to come up with something that works better for both of us. And again, to commend our partners at University of North Texas, they've been completely open-minded. They love the data-driven approach and are very appreciative of the opportunity to engage in the dialogue, as are we. So I want to share this with you as a roadmap for how we are working to solve this problem. We've recognized the contract rate that we have, but we've spent a pretty good amount of effort over the course of this year to be able to frame the problem in this way so that we can have a very sharp and focused conversation with UNT. Any questions or comments on that? Or I'd appreciate the board's feedback on, is this the right approach for us? Or is there some other thing that you all would like for us to consider?
I'm sure that this is part of the conversation. Can you tell us more about what conversations are happening around route planning for UNT?
So that goes back to the comment previously about how historically we had DCTA, in my opinion, has taken direction from the University of North Texas to say we would like for this bus to run on this route, this time of day, this day of week, this month of the year, et cetera, et cetera. The conversation now being led by Mr. Frith and Mr. Bell is, okay, how do these things fit into our overall network? Can we do things more efficiently? And in order to provide other opportunities to provide the same service in a better way. We're also looking at ridership on the different routes to say, here's a very low utilization route. What would happen if we reallocated that capacity to one of the higher utilization routes to get more frequency on a more regular basis? Now, we know how sensitive it is to change bus routes and all that sort of thing. So that requires all the communication, coordination, all that sort of stuff. But the message here is not removing bus service. It's applying the most effective bus service and moving the most amount of people by the most efficient mode possible. Make sense? Any other questions? Thoughts on approach? Alignment that this is the right direction?
I think this is a consistent drumbeat that we need to just keep moving on. I appreciate that they're still meeting with us and we're gonna have those conversations, but we know everything costs more, and that's a contract that was done an infinity ago. So I'm hopeful that they will continue to understand that and work towards something that's an equitable solution.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I think that I'm up for this one too, right? Okay, great. So one of the other things that we've been working on this year is establishing and building a real capital maintenance plan, not just for our vehicles, but also for our facilities. And what that has looked like under Mr. Bell's guidance and now Mr. Frith, who's going to be the owner of this process going forward, is just through the safety risk assessment process, identifying gaps and needs, anything from highlighting walkways and all that sort of stuff, to finding places where buildings are either in disrepair or on the verge of disrepair, and begun developing this list of projects that allows us to then prioritize capital expenditure in future years to maintain the assets that we have. What you see on this list here is $189,000 worth of projects that have been identified in this year that we would like to go forward with in next year. The top two are really around there are most urgent safety needs that require capital investment. AED installation, I think that we live in an age and day when everyone understands the importance of having availability of those sorts of things and having staff that are trained to respond in the event of an emergency. And so that's what that project is about. And then at the downtown Denton oh, yes, sir.
I know this is really small, but I would also encourage you to stock Narcan in your AED box. That's a very common practice now, and the Denton Chamber can help with that. But
Okay.
Just like AEDs, having a Narcan in a box or in your AED box is a great idea, and it lasts. It only says 2 years, but they're really good for 30. So,
Okay.
pro
Thank
tip
you.
53.
Thank you for that.
Agree very much.
Okay, thank you. The second item that you see is also a safety item. As we look at the lane between the bus platform and where the buses come in and out, and then the downtown Denton Transit Center. If you've ever been there at any time of day where there's lots of people moving, there are people getting on and off of buses. There are buses moving through the corridor, and then not infrequently, there's a person who takes their personal vehicle illegally through the lane and needs to be stopped and turned around. And there's not a lot of control, in our opinion, over where people are moving and where vehicles are moving and all that sorts of thing. And so this project is really about providing an opportunity to hire a traffic engineer, a certified professional who can look at that corridor and figure out how to make sure that all of those modes and pedestrians and bicyclists, because the A-Train rail trail starts at the downtown Denton Transit Center, how they all can move through there safely. And then beyond that, what you see is climate control issues, a bus wash repair at the bus O&M shop. This bus stop sign installation is not the sign installation associated with the intermediate service plan, but rather signage across the city of Denton that is in disrepair and is in need of replacement, so on and so forth. We won't go into the details on a lot of these small ones, but the point is we are beginning to develop this list of capital projects to vertical facilities. And so this will be a feature of our approach going forward. That was also addressed in the transit asset management plan. Okay. Yes, sir.
Some time ago, there was something bringing up one of our units to ADA specifications. Are there others in need of involving ADA?
Like a vehicle or a facility? Okay. Do you remember which one it was? It doesn't ring a bell offhand.
I just remember we got pictures of it.
Okay.
And it rang a bell with me to kind of look out. Because we have aging buildings.
Absolutely.
Look at that. I didn't know anything else that added.
I can't think of anything, but that's a great idea that ADA compliance and accessibility should be a feature of our facility maintenance plan for sure.
I found a lot just by rereading some of the ADA things.
Mhm.
And, oh, I didn't think about that. How far is the access?
Right.
You know,
Yes, sir. Thank you for that.
I think the thing he's talking about was it a sidewalk with Bonnie Bray somewhere around there by UNT campus? Is there a connection? I think, I remember there was a bunch of pictures. I think he's talking about there was a sidewalk that was all just repair that was connecting to the station that was kind of.
It may be, I'll have to look at that.
Would've
And,
been like-
yeah, we'll have to look into that and get back with you. But thank you for that. And that would, of course, would be a city facility that we would want to say, hey, here's a place where we want to make sure we got ADA accessibility so that people can get to bus stops. And that's part of our bus stop infrastructure plan, is looking at all those stops to make sure that they are accessible.
Well, we've got a lot of buildings
Right.
that, okay, but, they're not really there.
Right.
They, for years were a garage, now they're a bar.
Yes.
So. I'm from, sometimes city from.
Yes, sir. Something to be on the lookout for sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, next I'll turn it over to Austin to talk about expanded level projects.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm going to be presenting the proposed expanded level projects for fiscal year 2025. I'll be reviewing the first four ones, and then I will hand it over to Mr. Javier Trilla to present the items 5, 6, and 7. Items 8 and 9 have been previously presented as part of Mr. Maurice's presentation on rail. So this first ELP proposal aims to support the development of DCTA's ISP Intermediate Service Plan. As you may recall, DCTA is in the process of implementing phase 1 of the ISP. Our team is currently engaged in strategic planning phase of the second phase of our ISP, and this ELP will enable consultant support for detailed analysis and modeling of our network to develop cost-effective and customer-enhanced modes for our communities. Phase 2 will analyze data derived from phase 1 to continue improving connect performance, as well as connectivity and efficiencies within our UNT routes. Additionally, GO zone analysis will play a significant role in this effort as we explore areas within Denton that have potential for additional fixed routes based on data sets from our GO zone and fixed route services. Our next ELP is related to the long-range service plan. As we embark on solutions to support the intermediate service plan, DCTA needs a long-range plan to ensure our efforts towards the ISP contribute to a broader goal. The long-range plan will analyze and document the current state while developing phases for long-term service planning. Key focus areas of the long-range plan will include creative ways to increase ridership, enhancements to the rider experience, and improvements in safety. This plan will review past and existing route data sets to identify opportunities based on planned growth and outline future service areas with the greatest potential for growth. Additionally, the plan will establish governance standards for service planning and design and set a cadence for service performance reviews and route analysis to clearly define a roadmap for overall network enhancements. The next ELP is related to bus stop standards development. This will establish standardized guidelines for bus stop spacing, ADA compliance, bus stop sign location dimensions, and definition of amenity solutions. The current standards lack a cohesive and consistent approach to bus stop infrastructure across our network. And this plan will create a specific design for various bus stop types based on utilization and location. These design standards will include amenities such as shelters, benches, trash cans, lighting, digital and static signage, bike storage, and ADA requirements. These standards will be closely coordinated with the cities to align with any development district design codes and specifications. And then finally, the A-Train Enhancement Program. This ELP is going to be a key focus for fiscal year 25. The current program, as you all are aware, includes achieving 15-minute headways, extending the service down to downtown Carrollton, and exploring opportunities for the station at Corinth. This ELP will provide consultant support for DCTA to refine the program into detailed phases and outline specific tasks and coordination efforts to ensure a successful outcome. Support for FY 25 will include the review and verification of the interim speed enhancements project, along with construction services support. Additionally, FY 25 support will encompass preliminary engineering and refined cost estimates for each phase of this program, as well as guidance and support for the SIG grant funding application. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions on these four.
Anybody have any questions?
Last year, you gave a speech, regional meeting about, part of that speech involved standardization of bus stops and such. Did you get any traction on that? Is there anything of some kind of standards that you're trying to work on?
Well, yes, sir. The first step in the bus stop effort was the project that we completed this year to understand what are the different types of stops and where the stops need to be across the network. This takes it to the next level of defining, okay, what is the feature of a basic stop? What's the feature of a key stop, a mobility hub, so on and so forth. And so we took the first step, and this is the next one.
Okay, because I thought there were pretty good ideas that you were doing there. And I thought, is there anybody else?
Yes, sir. But we're going to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, Chair, members of the board. Javier Trella, VP Innovation and IT here at DCTA. Today I'll be presenting on 3 different expanded level projects, starting with a fiber locate and improvement assessment project for our fiber optic backbone. A little backstory: before 2011, before the A-Train's launch, we also laid down a fiber optic backbone that runs along the A-Train right-of-way corridor. That fiber optic backbone supports both our rail operations network as well as our enterprise network here at the agency. When the corridor was built and after it was turned over to the agency, we're currently lacking accurate as-built drawings of that rail, of that fiber backbone. In addition to that, we have numerous laterals and additional changes that have been made to the network due to PTC, different control points, and different operational network changes that have been made over the course of the past decade. What this has done, this lack of drawings, is we don't have this backbone actually registered with the Texas 811 DIG program. We're a little lucky that it goes along with DISD and some other major telcos. We haven't had too many cuts, but there have been a few over the course of time. So a lot of these changes actually were made before the engagement of our existing Rio Grande Pacific contractor. The scope of this project and the plan is to obtain identification and location of all the telecom handholds, which are vaults, fiber optic backbone, as well as lateral conduits that support our control points along the way, proper marking and condition assessment of these assets, deliverables, which include photographs, red line drawings, GPS coordinates, registration with the Texas 811 DIG program, and then remediation plans for any deficiencies that are found with the actual fiber optic backbone. In addition to this, for the sake of operational planning and capacity in the future, OTDR testing, which is basically testing of the light quality that goes to the fiber strands and all the different splices across the network to make sure that we have the right network capacity to support us in the future. It'll also give us an idea of how this fiber optic backbone is looking today and future planning for any improvements that we'll need to make along the way. And then finally, any identification and remediation planning for any problem areas. This is very much a locate and planning improvement project. There may be some more costs that come down the way that we'll find out from this project. But this project is 2 years long, beginning in FY 25. The costs are broken up top there to $278K for the first year, $175K for the second year, to go through all 5 tasks that I outlined earlier. And this project budget of $453,000 for the 2 years also includes provisions for flagging along the railroad and any other safety requirements that we need by our rail contractor to perform this service. These numbers were informed through a partial assessment that was done by one of our consulting partners in conjunction with our rail operator.
Javi,
Yes, sir.
Are we doing any ICAs for cost sharing on this since we're in the same pipeline with Denton ISD and some other providers? Or are these just segments that we have solely ourselves?
They're specifically for our segments. Primarily, the primary backbone is pretty easily identifiable, but we don't have as accurate marking of our vaults
Okay.
and our laterals that go to all the different conduits. Thank you. Next project is regarding project management software and implementation costs associated with this platform. We've come a long way in managing the anywhere between 35 and 40 on average projects that DCTA is currently working on. We used to use Excel and PowerPoint and all the basic Office 365 tools that we have available to us. But this year, at the ask of our VP of Planning over here, we went ahead and implemented a program called Smart Sheets. We have the base platform of Smart Sheets and some user licensing associated with it. You've probably seen some of the products of that work through the implementation of our Collin County Rides program and the detailed project plan breakout that we had. But really DCTA, as we grow our projects and we try to really understand our resource management, we're looking for a more advanced version of that platform to support our needs. I'm a big proponent of having implementation assistance with all these projects. I feel like projects don't really succeed unless they have the proper implementation and training for these platforms. I think here internally at staff, we've reached our max capability of what we can do with this platform. So the expanded level project that we're requesting will cover both licensing and platform fees for enhanced project management capabilities, as well as the development or labor associated with development of user templates, dashboard views, automated workflows, and other resource management tools. Ultimately, the goal is for DCTA to have a unified, user-friendly project management tool that enhances visibility to project health, resource allocation, and alignment with agency goals to make sure that we're following our success metrics. And the last ELP that I'll be presenting on is actually for both the IT department as well as the bus facilities department. We're asking for 2 non-revenue vehicles to support both departments. The IT department has been using a 2009 Ford Explorer for the past quite a long time. It's reached the end of its useful life. We have actually some safety concerns with it. My team travels from building to building to building all day long. They also support our A-Train platforms for any operational technology there. Some safety concerns is the vehicle's been, despite significant maintenance, it's still just not up to snuff, and we're still dealing with shutdowns on the highway. It's just, we need a new vehicle. And then for the facilities department, facility staff today currently uses 1 pickup truck that they share between janitorial and maintenance services, forcing our facilities management staff to use their own personal vehicles to go through different facilities, move equipment around, ultimately leading to additional expenses and reimbursements. So the concept, or what we're asking for here, is 2 non-revenue vehicles that have a cost of approximately $40,000 a piece to support both departments. Any questions? Hearing none. Thank you very much.
Okay. We've covered a lot of things. It's a big budget. Here's some information. We're rounding the corner. We've covered revenues from a big picture perspective. We've covered all of the meat and potatoes that is the engine from the expenditure perspective that makes us go, from the operation side, the services that we provide. We're rounding the corner, and one thing I listen for sometimes when I'm in long presentations, sometimes the presenter will let it slip as to how many more slides there are. We're on slide 55 of 71, okay? So we're gonna cover general administrative expenses. It encompasses a lot of different departments, the non-operational departments. And so I will focus on a couple of things here. One is, in total, a $9.9 million proposed expenditure related to G&A overall. compared to a $9.3 million budget from from this current year. Some of those main changes have to do with outsourced services and charges with a $275,000 increase. That increase, get your words together. As I stated from the beginning, this area in particular encompasses a number of different department teams. And so within there's some movements upwards in terms of outsourced charges and the services and some movements downwards. The main area within there that has some movement has to do with our IT team and specifically some of the cybersecurity related expenditures. It has to do with greater penetration testing to make sure that we remain safe and secure from a technical perspective. And so there is a greater expenditure within there. The other area that you'll see an increase here within G&A is in the utilities area. And this kind of harkens back to that part of the comment where I was saying we're working to move things into like areas where things, where our staff members can work through specific areas. So this represents a movement from another area within our budget. So if you were to look at our bus operations area in that same line, you'll see $156,000 reduction. This is increasing because it reduced in another area. It's a movement. Largely, aside from that, you have some movements in other areas, but those are kind of the material changes within the general administrative area. If there are specific questions, I am happy to answer those. Okay, capital. Okay, so you still can't see it. At least if your vision is like my vision, you still probably can't see it, but you have it in front of you in paper. And what we'll do is zoom into specific areas and talk about what exactly is happening here. So during Mr. Bell's conversation, I was trying to remember where it came up. During Mr. Bell's conversation where he was discussing operations, there was a purchase or a discussion about purchase of 3 new buses. That's what that is. The capital expenditure related to the purchase of 3 new buses. You have seen during the previous year's budget, us setting aside funds. You've heard us talking about TAM, transit asset management planning. And so the 2 areas here and here represent us beginning the continuation of setting aside reserves so that we are able to make these large purchases and invest in our infrastructure in the future as we continue to age and mature as a transit authority. So these items in blue don't represent cash spend, but it represents a setting aside of funds for the future. You've heard during the rail portion of the conversation about PTC or positive train control, and that represents, that's where that expenditure lies. You also heard during that conversation and saw details presented in a number of different ways about the rail major maintenance line item and what all that comprised of. So this is where that resides, okay? And you also heard during the rail, say this is kind of cool because it's like a summary of all the things that you've heard and showing you where within the budget they reside. You also heard during the rail conversation about the software that's needed in order to improve our dispatching abilities. So that's where that resided. It represents, it's an ELP and it represents it's broken over the course of 2 years. Zooming into the bottom part of that sheet that you have in front of you. Infrastructure acquisition, or that is the funding that is set aside for construction of our new home office that has been provided to us through grant funding, et cetera. So we have it staggered out. The number, the amounts change because we have better ability to pinpoint when we anticipate spending those, but the total amount hasn't changed. That's the same thing too with the ERP implementation. still a total of $2.1 million. We anticipate spending about $500,000 during this year, and so the funds will roll. What you can expect in those areas where you have approved the spending related to a project that's going to take multiple years to bring to bear is that by the time we come back to approve the budget, we'll have a little bit more time that'll pass. It'll allow us to better pinpoint where we believe that number is going to hit. And so we will adjust the 2025 number to be a little bit more consistent with where we believe the 2025 spending to be, if that makes sense. The total will still remain $2.1 million, as is the case for infrastructure acquisition, et cetera. Moving down the page, the electronic safety and security program is an item that was approved during the 2024 budget, a multiple year capital expenditure. And so you see the continuation of that. The ELPs that you just heard from Javier Trilla appear here. So that's where they reside. And then TRIP funding, which I put a purple box around that because it appears on the capital sheet, but it's not. It's funding that assists our member cities in being able to take care of things that help improve transit. And so that's the estimate for that amount for this particular year.
So Sherelle, the highlighted trip, you highlighted that because that's not been approved yet by action.
Correct.
Right. That will
Correct.
be a discussion.
And this is based on we have this highlighted because it's not approved, but specifically you kind of see they're based on the numbers are round as opposed to specific, right? And we have some calculations that help us to see where we estimate revenues and expenditures to go. And so these numbers will be made more specific as we get to those specific years, if that makes sense. Are there any other questions on this? Okay. This is just a graphic that kind of helps you to see. I talked a little bit about on the previous slide, the PTC enhancements for $2.5 million. And I talked about the electronic safety and security. That $1.5 million represents the spending during this current year on a multiple year project that was approved during the 2024 budget. Operating expenses, debt service. So largely contractual amount when you enter. I'm telling y'all stuff you already know. I'm looking at all the city faces around the table. So we have a total of 13.4. I'm adding these two numbers, a total of 13.4 million that will be outstanding at the end of September 2025. And at the point in which you enter into those agreements, it spells it out pretty clearly. So that is the estimate in terms of the total of $1.97 million that encompasses both the principal and the interest. Now, one thing I'm looking at from a CFO perspective is that these two tranches of debt are roughly 3 or 4 years old. Typically, when you get out in that 5-year range, 5 to 6 years might be a good time to look at the market and figure out if refinancing would be to the agency's to our benefit. Right now, it's okay to remain where we are because there are significant costs that are incurred in the refinancing of these sorts of debt obligations. So it functions similar to if you were to refinance your home, the origination fees can be, you want to time it right and make sure that the interest is benefiting you in doing that. But I just wanted to make mention of it. It's on my mind. Okay.
Now there are 3 slides left and lunch is here. So wanted to just give you a snapshot of the DCTA organization. And we talked at the outset, we started this whole conversation with the relative size of operating budget in 2022 versus ridership then, and the size of this operating budget now relative to the ridership that we project in fiscal year 2025. That happens as a result of the hard work of our staff and the great team that we've assembled over the course of the year that I'm really, really proud of. So I want to give you a snapshot of how the organization has was started out in the fiscal 2024 budget. And you recall, we had about a third of our positions on the admin side that were open or newly formed. And so the good news is all those positions there that you see in gray have been filled with the exception of two. One being the security systems coordinator. Through the course of the process, we realized that we needed to defer the security and access control project. That position was primarily identified to support that program, and so it didn't make sense to fill the need. Moving forward, once we saw the beginning of our APC, automatic passenger counter program on the bus side, we also see maybe there's some technician support required to maintain an electrical shop of sorts. And so that position is going to continue to be defined as we go throughout the course of this year. So we kept it in the budget, but we didn't fill it. Another position that didn't get filled is this rail operations coordinator position, primarily because we didn't have the vision when this budget was struck for the A-Train program management project or contract that was defined and identified over the course of defining what the A-Train enhancement program is going to be. And so we'd like to see, once we get this consultant team on board, what the A-Train program will look like in the future and understand how best to staff the A-Train department moving forward. All of the other positions that we requested, plus the positions that were added or amended in fiscal year 2023, we're glad to say have been filled. So the fiscal year 2024 structure here at the year end looks much bigger because we've transitioned 96 positions from NTMC into the DCTA organization, or we will have done so beginning tomorrow when the first batch of non-operators join over, and then on July 22nd when the operators join us. But this is where you see all those pieces come together. Vacant position that wasn't filled and is wiped from the budget, a vacant position that wasn't filled and that will remain in the budget. And then moving into 2025, the structure looks substantively the same, but we have requested 5 additional positions. The 2 supervisors you talked about before to eliminate the overtime expense that we're seeing and provide better support to our operators and customers. The project control specialist, which really is a dedicated program management resource to Austin and his team to make sure that every project that we're doing here at DCTA, anything that has a scope, schedule, and budget, doesn't have to be a capital project, could be a process that we just run every year, that we've got the right staff assigned to it, that we have the right workload assigned to those staff members, so that when we come back and ask you for resources, we can provide you really good justification as to why that is and maintain our high level of efficiency. This manager of service design and performance in the planning department really is in response to all of these emerging opportunities that we're seeing and the need to be able to have someone dedicated to figuring out how do we launch the next, whatever the next Collin County ride service is, and then transition that service into a member city type service or the Frisco Go Zone or the span of Denton County partnership and opportunity. And then finally, the other that you see is the manager of human resources. As Jackie Bronson's role has expanded, she's a human resources expert, but she's required in a lot of different areas. And so we're asking for this leader for a human resources function to provide that specific leadership to our existing great human resources staff. On this slide, what you see, these descriptions are for those positions that I just talked about. This table is talking about headcount evolution from fiscal year 2022 and through this fiscal year 2025 budget. It's a net add of 3 positions. We took 2 positions out of the marketing department. I failed to mention that, but 2 positions have been taken from the marketing department as we have transitioned into an external marketing firm relationship, and we expect a broader solicitation for those services this year coming. And so we need fewer heads internally as we leverage that external resource. And then the graph at the right just shows the staff allocation by salary band. You see a very healthy distribution, looking at how we have are structured an organization that allows us to perform work at the lowest level and maintain optimum efficiencies. That brings us to the end of our fiscal year 2025 budget presentation. Happy to answer any questions or let Sherelle answer the questions. But
It's like at the end when church is over and all the people saying.
that's right. But like Jane said at the beginning, this is an all hands on deck sort of exercise. This starts with budget workshops in April and every team coming in talking about the things that they need. And I'm just continually encouraged by the thoughtfulness that goes into these budget requests, the thoughtfulness that goes into taking all that input and turning it into the document that you see right here. It couldn't happen without the support of every person on the staff and of course with the leadership of our finance team, Jane and Dawn and Sherelle and everybody else. So thank you all very much. And Sherelle will be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from anyone?
Not a question, but just a couple of comments. First of all, thank you so much for you keep saying the word thoughtfulness. It's the right word, thoughtfulness that went into, that always goes into the staffing decisions that you come to us with. I know that a lot of organizations like ours have problems with like administrative bloat. And that's something that I see you really guarding against. You never come to us for an ask for an additional position unless you have a really, really good justification for it. Thank you for that. Also, I'd just like to commend all of our staff. The vision that we have set, particularly in this last year, is incredibly ambitious. And the workload that the board has put on staff is huge. And you've done such a good job of prioritizing, scoping, managing this huge workload in a way that is actually getting results. So thank you all so much for that.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you.
So I just wanted to mention, so what happens from here? We were listening for any changes, we like that, but we don't like that, because what this represents is our opportunity to show you what is included in this budget and for you to have and provide feedback for what things need to be updated. I don't know that I have heard a ton of tweaks and changes, but if we're mistaken on that, please do let us know, through your conversations with Paul. What you should expect going forward is we'll come back next month with another look at this budget. It will include a little bit more information around long-range financial plan, around TRIP. What you should expect is that as we continue to continue to gather more information specifically from some of our external partners and those sorts of things, that we might have tweaks and changes to the numbers. We will inform you of what those changes are. So yes, and we kind of outlined all of that in the overall process. I don't want to leave the lectern without saying a huge thank you to Dawn and Jane. Like, thank you. You two are amazing and we are blessed to have you. They did amazing work. And a happy belated birthday. Jane's birthday was yesterday too. And that's it. I'm concluded. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate all the hard work everyone's put into this. It really shows. We're going to go ahead and take a recess for about 20 minutes so the board can get lunch, and then we will get back around 12:30 and move on to the next item. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 12:32 and reconvening the DCTA board meeting. And next item is item 3. Discuss, consider termination of the member city transit oriented development study. Mr. Christina.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board. This is an action item, and our recommendation is that the board vote to terminate the member city transit oriented development study and deobligate grant funds to the FTA in the amount of $83,823 for FTA grant as specified pilot program for transit oriented development planning. If you recall, the transit oriented development study was the result of a grant won from the Federal Transit Administration in fiscal year 2019 that was targeted to look at transit oriented development concepts across what is now called the Kansas City Southern or Canadian Pacific Kansas City Southern corridor, starting at just to the west of the UNT campus, passing through Old Town, Louisville, and then terminating in Carrollton. The intent of the study was to educate stakeholders about transit-oriented development and understand how DCTA could do transit-oriented development in the future, specifically around the A-Train corridor. It also included the extensive concept development for the transit-oriented development site at Old Town Louisville on the A-Train corridor. We went through a significant portion of the technical scope of work that brought together demonstration area plans for various types of stations that could be found on that alternative corridor, whether it being an urban center, a suburban center, a greenfield site, et cetera. And what has been produced is a volume of technical documentations that talk about how those plans come together, provide renderings like you see here for future reference as we think about TOD on the A-Train, because we know that the Old Town site is our first one, but of course we see great opportunity for other development in places elsewhere along the corridor, especially around downtown Denton Transit Center and potentially Med Park in the near future. So where we stand today is really looking at what our priorities are this year and then moving forward. And in our January strategic workshop, we talked about goals and objectives in the 2025 to 2027 timeframe, and we talked about strategic objectives out to the 2035 timeframe. And that conversation led us to conclude that the development of transit TOD on this alternative corridor does not fall within the priorities that the DCTA board provided. And given that we've gotten a good amount of technical information about how to do TOD, and we're well in the process of talking about Old Town Louisville specifically, and we're going to be meeting on that even more extensively in the next month or two. That really brings us to the recommendation of closing this project, bringing it to conclusion, and returning the grant funds that remain back to FTA so that we can focus on the highest priorities for the agency, which are reflected in the 2025 budget as well as our 2024 work plan. And so that brings us to this request. So as we think about how we continue transit-oriented development, we focus on the Old Town A-Train station, we talk about TOD policy, and we continue to engage with local jurisdictions to understand how they think and feel about transit-oriented development. And that is really what guides our efforts moving forward, the alignment of our interests and our member city interests. The table down here at the bottom shows you the budget available from the various funding sources and then the budget that's remaining from the FTA. What would happen with the DCTA budget would just goes back into the coffers, and then we would contact the FTA to deobligate those funds, and that would allow them to use that money on other projects. We have communicated with Region 6 about this already, told them that we think that this is coming, and obviously through the January conversation, we think that this is the right next step for us. And so with that, that is our recommendation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Okay, board, any questions or agenda, emotions?
I move approval.
Have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Gonzalez. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us to regular agenda item number 4. This is discuss update on the Public Transit Agency Safety Plan.
Steve Swanberg, our senior manager.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of board members, executive leadership, coworkers, friends, guests. It's great to be here. First of all, to talk to you about something near to dear in my heart, and that's safety of our employees, our organization, our customers, and the public. So I've got a few things that I'm going to talk about today, more specifically, the safety management system that we've created, that we're enhancing, and all the safety programs are rolling out, and I'm going to summarize that here shortly. Okay, so we're going to talk about our safety management system. I'm going to give you a little recap from our last meeting in February. Also, we're going to talk about bus operations, our IFR incident frequency rates, GO Zone safety and IFR summaries, and then Rio Grande Pacific Corporation's IFR summary as well. And then I'll take any questions you might have at the end. So as a recap, our safety management system houses all of our programs. That includes our PTASP, or our Public Transit Agency Safety Plan. That also includes our SSPP, or our System Safety Program Plan. And it also includes all the programs that we're developing now, such as fall protection, such as confined space, bloodborne pathogens, all the different programs that we have that we've rolled out, that we incorporated in the front lines and throughout our organization to make sure that we're lowering the risk and making sure we're a safer organization. As you can see in the yellow, those are some things that we focused on in 2024. We really focused hard on our risk management system. And then also in the gray, we have started those processes as well. So we can give it a comprehensive review. So the first slide I want to talk about is some things that we've been doing that you may not know about. And that is, one is a job hazard analysis. So every task or activity or every piece of equipment, you have to do a job hazard analysis, or what they call a JHA on, and that tells you all the hazards associated with that particular item or task. Then you progress to an SOP, and then you press comprehensive training. So that's the first start of what you need to do to make sure that we identify what PPE we use for employees, et cetera. So we've done 6 of those, and it's counting. They continue to add up as we go through our risk management process. Our next program we've rolled out is our hazardous weather program for the winter, for the summer, for all the environmental factors. And we have piggybacked on our Denton County emergency management. Great folks. They do a fantastic job. And also we've incorporated our own messaging to our frontline employees of things that might occur, things that are happening, to make sure that they have firsthand information as quickly as possible and they don't have to wait for the media. Along with that is our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center. We do respond to that at times. We did respond to the tornadoes on May 25th here in our region, specifically Denton County and Cook County. We did respond to that with buses and drivers and emergency response to the Shell gas station that was destroyed on Highway 35. So we are working with Denton County and TDM, our Texas Department of Emergency Management, with regard to our response. So we're privileged to be able to assist in any way we can. And then also we rolled out our facility assessment program. That is our checks and balances of what we look like as an organization. What does our facilities look like? Are we making sure that our facilities are safe, that we're not putting anybody in danger, et cetera? So we've done one at the bus O&M already, which we found about 49 different items that we have put on our risk registry. Well, I'll talk about here in a little bit, which is a really important component of our risk management system. So this is nothing, no surprises here. This is just a story that has 2 sides to it, actually. The first side is what we see every month, and that is our IFR rates for year over year, which is, you see, 0.59 versus 0.84 year over year. We're doing a lot better. There's a lot of reasons why, which I'll get into here in my next slides. If you look at that, we've had 2 collisions, both non-preventable by our employees, and also 2 non-collision incidents, which an operator was threatened by a customer for missing their stop, and then also a slip, trip, and fall by an employee at DDTC, which the FTA reached out to us later and deemed that a non-FTA. We didn't want to change any data, so we just left it up there for reference purposes. But the other story it doesn't show, and which I'd like to talk about a second, is we've had 0 preventable FTA crashes for 2024, which I think is a very notable item for our drivers and how professional they are out there. So what are we doing to make this happen? It doesn't happen because we think it should. It's things that we have to do as an organization to make sure we increase our level of protection for our employees, customers, and the community. So we've rolled out safety briefings, and that's a program we've rolled out to our drivers to make sure that they have all the current hazards, all the current changes, whether they be detours, whether they be incidents they might run into on their routes. So that's something we rolled out in 2024. We also rolled out a buffer space concept, We kind of borrowed that from work zone traffic control. A buffer space is getting you room between your bus and a particular hazard, whether that be a vehicle in front of you, whether that be different items. So we want to make sure that our drivers are thinking 360 degrees around their vehicle. We've also launched our safety alerts program associated with our emergency management program. That's where if there's severe weather, if there's tornado warnings, if there's any kind of warnings that our drivers need to know immediately, we have a process in place that dispatches that information to them immediately. We also have a call tree to make sure leadership knows that we've made that happen and we've, as an organization, have a common operating picture. Our behavioral safety classes, we focus on this because at times when we do repetitive movements or repetitive things on a daily basis, sometimes complacency can drop in. We do the same thing, and sometimes we have tunnel vision on that because we focus so much on what we're doing in front of us that we lose our surroundings. So we focus on behavioral aspects of that from a safety perspective. We've updated our safety programs. One of the safety programs that we've updated and we've rolled out this year that I'm really excited about is for the frontline employees, is what you have in front of you, and that's our safety coin. It's a coin that's part of the program of our safety excellence program, which is a certificate. And also it's presented to the employee in front of their peers, in front of leadership, to make sure instead of us safety guys telling folks what we don't want them to do, we focus on what we like and enjoy them to do. And that is take care of one another. And it's a positive way to get that message saturated throughout our organization. Continuing our safety risk registry. So I have a few slides here that I'll show you about our safety risk registry. I won't get really into detail here, but we've really done a comprehensive look at that. And I think we've improved it quite nicely. We've opened up the pipelines of communication to our frontline employees. And what that means is we're available, we're listening, and we're visible. I'm actually housed in the operation. I've embedded myself inside the operation to make sure that I'm readily available for the operators, for our frontline employees, for our safety teams, access, for advice, for mentorship, for leadership. And so that's working quite nicely. We've opened up several pipelines, as I mentioned on the earlier bullet points here of our safety briefings. We're constantly getting information to the front lines. So operators providing feedback, as you'll see in the next slide, has been tremendous because of these initiatives that we've rolled out in 2024. So I like to say this is a then now slide, if you will. So if you look on the left side of the slide, this was our safety risk registry that was assembled in 2023 when I came on board. That's what it looked like. We were a little bit top heavy with risk. It wasn't a whole very comprehensive look. There was only about 30 items on it. And we weren't necessarily in a position where we were listening to what we needed to hear. And that's information from our frontline employees because they're the experts at what they do every day. So if you look at to the right side, this is today. This is June 2024. Our risk registry has gone to over 250 items. Now, that being said, we have closed 101 items of those 250 in 8 months. That is not because of me that I'm doing this alone. This is because of a team effort throughout the entire organization, from finance to support us on things that we want to do for safety, from the operations to make sure that we're embedded and supportive in the operation where there's not this oil, water, safety operation thing going on. So thank you, sir. So a lot of successes, most of the successes, if not all the successes that we're experiencing are from planning, but also from teamwork and synergy with regard to what the message is. So I wanted to get you a little bit of granular items that you may not see. And so I've copied a couple things here from high priority, medium priority, and low priority on what our safety risk registry actually looks like. Whoops, it slid on me here. Let me go back. There we go. So our high risk items, things like fuel tanks, catwalks installation, fall protection, those are very important because employees could get hurt or fall from heights. So that is a very high priority for us. Also correcting piping our RY stations. On one of our safety assessments we did, we found out that there's an iron pipe attached to the eyewash stations. Well, we know iron and water don't get along very well. They make rust. So we're having orange water come out of the system. So we looked at that a little bit deeper and we wanted to make sure that that was corrected as well. On our medium priorities, our bus stop signs, too close to the road, we're clipping them with our mirrors. So we did an analysis on that. So we faced those inward, you'll notice that. Also, our generators not anchored down just in case we do have a tornado or some unexpected weather event, environmental factor. Those need to be tied down so make sure that we have auxiliary or powered just in case of that emergency. And then also our messaging that is important for our NFPA or National Fire Protection Agency as far as our diamonds, missing our generators, and if you deal with oil or any kind of gas, those have to be readily available just in case there is a fire, the fire department knows exactly what they're dealing with. And then some of our lower priorities, the lights weren't caged in the fleet bay. We always like to have our lights caged. That way, if something does happen or there's a vibration, the lights don't fall on our employees or our equipment. So we've also identified that. And also our fleet door wasn't locking. So that was a safety concern or a security concern that we brought forward that is in process of fixing. So I wanted to bring some examples of each to kind of give you a better perspective and visibility on exactly what are we doing over there? What are all these things you're talking about? This is a great slide that I want to put on here. It kind of tells a story. And I'm going to, if you would, I'm going to share this story with you. And that is, as we began in October 23, our risk registry was sputtering. As I indicated in the previous slide, it was about 30 items. It wasn't really robust. So what we did was we sat down and did a risk assessment and we did a gap analysis. Or what are we missing here? And so what we were missing is we weren't listening. We didn't give our opportunities enough to be in the front lines to listen to the employees. Well, once they found out that we were visible, that we were available, and that we were listening, you can imagine what happened. And that is in November and December, you can see that with those items rising because all of the discovery that's being brought forward in our safety management system. In January, again, now that they know it's working because we started mitigating some of those, our employees said, wow, this is a system that works. And so what happened is you see the increase in February all the way up to March, which is our peak items list as far as things being brought into our risk registry. And so that's indicative of them acknowledging that this is working. We're going to give you the information you need to be a safer organization. And then obviously through April through June, we've mitigated some of those. But one constant item on this chart that I'd like to point out is that our blue bar or our closed item bar continues to rise as we get things in. So it's a cycle. So we get things in, we mitigate it. At the same time, our red bar stayed the same. We have some significant items on there that we're addressing. Those are all being registered and have plans to fix. Some of those are more expensive than others. So it's harder to fix those, but we're mitigating those temporarily until we get a permanent solution. So that's a story that I like to tell. That's a success story for our organization that everyone in the organization needs to know. And it's something that we've all participated in, from the operation, finance to procurement to HR, with all the policies that we've been developing and all the procedures and SOPs. All those things add up as a complete operating picture to reduce the risk for the organization. So going over to our Go Zone IFR performance, as you can see there, better year over year. Highlighting those little yellow circles are non-preventable by the Go Zone driver. So what we've identified in our path forward is they've had a lot of forward motion crashes. So that concept that we've rolled out in the bus operation as a template, our buffer space, that's going to be kind of rolled out with them in our path forward, talking about their risk mitigation and how they align to our PTAS. So we're going to get to the root causes. We're going to get to catalog their risks as well. And so they're going to mirror us as far as our efforts as well. In our Rio Grande Pacific incident frequency rate, we've had 2 incidents, both employee injuries. One was the right of way and one was mechanical. And our path forward on there is their safety risk registry. Again, we're going to use the process that we know that works. I'm going to make sure those are illustrated and displayed for our Rio Grande folks to collaborate on. So this is a slide just as a reminder, later in the future, with all these changes that we've done with our safety management system and all the programs we've rolled out and all the initiatives, we want to let you know that later this year, I'll be before you for your consideration and approval of our updated PTASP. And I'm excited to bring that to you because that means it's just we've bettered it and we've made it better and we've lowered the risk for our organization. As you see, the reactive, proactive, and predictive. When I first started in October, we were a lot of reactive. There was a lot of crisis management going on. As we progressed through these processes and actually got feedback and those pipelines opened up of communication from our frontline employees to us, and they acknowledged that we're not only saying we're listening, we're actually listening. And we started to solve their problems and solve the organizational concerns. We started to be more proactive. They told us things that were happening, that could happen before it happened, which is where we want to be. We're not done, because that's not where I'm happy. Where I'm happy is I'd like to be predictive and anticipate what's going to happen next through our historical data, through our interactions with our employees, and through innovation. So that's where I want to get us as an organization. Of course, we've got some work to do. It's a young program, but I think we've made large strides in the last 8 months, and that's to attribute to everyone here, including the board, for your support and leadership throughout this adjustment as we have in front of us.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll send it back to you for any questions that you might have.
I think this tells a great story. Questions?
Yeah, how many of those 22 red items are in the 2025 budget?
So most of those are in the budget, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the AEDs were one of them, and then doing the diagnostics for the downtown Denton Transit Center is another.
Also training as well, sir.
Right. So there is things that were submitted in the budget and then things that need to be developed to go into future budgets, but we're working to tie those things together.
Okay. The second question kind of goes on in terms of driver training. What does the first aid training for drivers look like, or does it exist?
Oh, yes, sir, it does. So we have instructors designated for the driver training. Right now, we are developing a day one training as far as HR stuff, as far as the normal safety programs, such as hazardous communications, such as all of the normal safety programs you'd find in any organization. However, they shift over to driver training, and we have designated instructors designed to get them through about 100-hour course for that. And that's associated with our capsule program, and that's associated with everything that we see at DCTA specifically.
What are some of the skills that a driver is going to be trained in the first aid?
First aid, you said,
First aid.
not first day.
First day?
First aid.
Oh, first aid, yes, sir. So our schedule, I apologize. Okay. So our first day, so our AEDs, it's a program that we're rolling out for 2025. It's important for us to have AEDs in all our locations, CPR qualified as well, and then also first aid. So we'll be contracting somebody to come in and get those all completed for us. And that's in my budget, sir, for 2025.
I would just encourage to include Narcan training in that.
Yes, sir. Will do. Thank you.
Quick question, on the PTAS, is that a local document or is that a document that you send up for approval through FTA or?
So it is a local document to start. However, we use our Texas Department of Transportation to approve, as well as the board to approve our update, if you will. It's reviewed every year. If there's any changes, then that's when we have to get approval.
So TxDOT does review it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then just as a comment, I just want to say thank you to you and Paul for your coordination and cooperation with Denton County during the tornado event. And I mean, that couldn't have been done without you. Y'all transported a lot of people that were in harm's way in hazardous situation. And I want to thank you for your quick response and your immediate picking up the phone in the middle of the night and early in the morning and putting all that together and rounding up drivers and getting buses ready for that. So Denton County very much appreciates that. And I know the citizens do as well. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anything else from anybody?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to take a moment to commend Steve for his leadership and vision in this program. That first slide that contains all those different various bits and pieces, he's done a great job articulating, here's the path forward and here's how we're going to tackle these individual aspects. The bus safety performance this year has been exceptional year over year in performance. And the contractor operations that we have with Rio Grande Pacific and VIA on GoZone have to be approached differently. But he has created the template that allows him to take that now to those two contract operations and saying, safety isn't expensive. It just requires effort. So let's figure out how to do this so that we can see the same sort of continuous year over year improvement. So always my support for this program is unwavering. So thank you very much. The vision is 0 incidents.
Yes, sir.
No, I also want to comment. Thank you, Mr. Swanberger. I really still like that slide you showed where you're getting everything completed, you know, and I'm looking forward to when you come back again, it continues to go, that blue line continues to go up.
Yes, sir. I think we're up to 103 right now, sir. So we're continuing to do that.
That's great. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. All right.
Next item we have is any items of local regional updates, legislative issues. Do we have anything, Paul, on that?
Just by way of brief update on Regional Transit 2.0, staff has been engaged with NCT COG staff on the kickoff of that program. We had a call with myself, Chair Gilmore, Michael Morris, his staff, and their consultant, and we've begun compiling information that we're going to share with them to help them in their documentation. The work that we did in January to identify the board's priorities on that program continues to be very valuable so that we can stay focused on the outcomes that we're after. So we'll continue to bring you updates as that regional transit 2.0 initiative progresses.
Thank you. Next is informational reports. We have it on at your place, safety service, ridership reports, etc. That takes us now to future agenda items or board member requests. Are there any from the board? Okay, seeing none, our next regular meeting is July 25th. Any items to report of community interest? It's your opportunity. Yes.
Yeah, pardon me. Saturday will be the Liberty Run and the Yankee Doodle Parade in Denton. The Yankee Doodle Parade will be around the square starting at 9 a.m. And then our annual July Jubilee will be on Wednesday, July 3rd, starting at 6 p.m. Hopefully the drone show doesn't get rained out this year in spectacular fashion. It will be at Quakertown Park this year, not on the square. But as always, I'm sure parking will be a real challenge. So I would encourage everyone to take transit to the DDTC to get to the July Jubilee on July 3rd.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman or Vice Chair, I'll just add, Mr. Gonzalez mentioned the response by DCTA to the tornadoes. Our hearts go out to the people who were affected there, and we're grateful for the relationship with Denton County EOC that let us respond. We have worked hard to recognize the DCTA employees who responded to that incident. They were notified on Saturday, May 25th at 12:30 a.m. and stayed on scene in various capacities until May 26th, Sunday morning at 5 or Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock, both in the field, in dispatch, and in various locations. Those people were Mr. Steve Swanberg, our manager of safety, Mr. Tim Bishop, mechanic, Mr. Troy Rayleigh, Director of Bus Service Planning, Ms. Ashley Wood, Manager of Bus Operations Management, Mr. Walter Heron, Bus Operator, Mr. Eric Hill Rivera, one of our safety coordinators. So again, thank you to all those employees for their efforts.
Paul, Joe, do we have any executive session? No. Okay, if we don't have any executive session item, then is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned approximately 1 p.m.